Bueno, muchas gracias por. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for having invited us to be here, especially me. He's really a star of Colombian cinema. And for me, it's a privilege to be in Armenia, firstly. It's a privilege to be in this film festival, which this is the land of Peleshan and Parajanov in a certain way. And so we are in the land of the best filmmakers in the world. And I'm not telling that because you are there and you are Armenians. I really believe in that. I met Ciro Guerra when he was just a boy who has done a film that almost nobody knew at that moment. It was a film called La Sombra del Caminante. In English was the title?
The title in English was The Wandering Shadows.
So it was a film with almost no budget, but it was a film which in a way was absolutely well received step by step, not immediately, but I remember that Ciro, at that moment, he has been traveling around the world for almost 2 years with his small film, with a low budget film. At that moment, I remember very well, we were in Hamburg. At that moment, I was not a programmer of Hamburg. I was just covering for a small publication in Argentina. And I remember that neither he nor I had money in our pocket, so we went to Burger King just to have French fries because it was the easiest, that was the cheapest thing to eat that day. I think that his life and my life has changed completely since then. Nowadays, I wouldn't say that we can pay any restaurant, but we can go beyond Burger King. But his life really changed completely because he has become is not anymore the main hope from Colombian cinema. He's really one of the main figures in Colombian cinema nowadays, not only Colombian cinema, I would say, but also Latin American cinema. And when La Sombra when his first film appears, I was wondering what would be the next film. The next film was in Cannes later on. In English again is The Journey's Wind. The Journey's Wind. Los Viajes del Viento is the Spanish title. And it was a film which was different. It was a film that changed. Of course, there was a lot of money behind it, not as the first one. And it had some kind of, you would see immediately that the filmmaker was an extremely talented filmmaker. But this film was more on the verge of a film for foreigners, I would say. I like it, but I think I told you. But it was those type of films that can love to show it, and is a way to colonize good filmmakers. Although the film was not absolutely that, it was a film which was extremely beautiful, but it was on certain place that filmmakers could be in dangers. So I asked myself, and we met before the film came out in Cartagena, which is a very beautiful city in Colombia. And I realized that at that moment already, Ciro became a public figure in Colombia because in the festival, Ciro Guerra is here, Ciro Guerra is there, there is a new film by Ciro Guerra. And that film was the film that won here, I think, 2 years ago. El Abrazo de la Serpiente, The Serpent Embrace is the title. It was in Europe. Yes. So when I saw the film, I was absolutely surprised. I saw it in Cannes, firstly. I saw it a couple of, like 3 or 4 times I saw your film. And I said, okay, there Ciro has accomplished what he really is. He's really a filmmaker. And it's such an accomplished film because on one hand, again, it's something that Cannes could easily buy it, not only Cannes this time, the Oscars. But at the same time, it's a film which is absolutely personal, and I would say authentic. And I like to, this is just a brief presentation, but I like to talk about, on one hand, the development and evolution of his filmmaking, also to contextualize his films in Colombian cinema and Latin American cinema, and at the very end, my idea is to talk on what is coming next, because he is preparing 2 more films. One is quite daring and quite, I would say, again, he likes to be in danger, because he is going to be doing he will be adapting a novel by Coetzee, the South African writer, and that I guess is going to be spoken in English, because Mark Rylance is on the cast. So he is on the verge of selling his soul to evil, which is called Hollywood, or to be there working on the system from a very authentic and personal way. Like, for instance, I think it does Cuarón, the Mexican filmmaker. So his future is to become a Cuarón from Colombia, or to become a Gonzalo Iñárritu from Colombia. The first path is the good path. The second path is the path of the evil, so to speak.
So let's see where you go.
Yeah, we have to see. I don't know. So let's start. Welcome to be here. So when you start doing film, your first film is a film, I guess it's less than $2,000, $3,000 budget. Yeah? Let's talk a little bit about that film, how it came out to you, and then maybe we go directly to the Embrace of the Serpent. Mm-hmm. I found a kind of connection between one and the other. They are so different on one hand, but in the 2 films, you are in a way obsessed with the power of plants, because in the first one there is a kind of medicine plant, and in the third one also. So that it could be a connection. The connection is connected not with the plant, but if not with perception, which I think for you is a very important issue in cinema. How to work not only on perception of your characters, but the perception of the viewers, because the perception is changed through the mise-en-scène, the way that you stage what is behind, what is in front of the eyes and ears of the audience. So let's start about that, if you like.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roger, for the introduction. It's great to be here with you after all these years. I had forgotten the Burger King anecdote, which is really funny, and I'm glad also that you became programmer eventually for the Hamburg Film Festival, and that you have been a great supporter of the most daring and risk-taking Latin American cinema from there. I think the films that I've made so far, one thing that I consciously try to do is to make them completely different on a surface level. Because I think the connections between them are very deep, very profound, very deep, but they are not obvious. They are not, it is not interesting to me to make the same film all over and over again and to use the same techniques and the same. There are filmmakers who do that, and I respect that, I admire that. But in my case, I think every film should be a new experience, a new path, a new adventure in a way. So I like that. So I like to work with, and that is in every. Cinema is composed of so many elements, and so the ability to combine them in different ways every time, for me, it's super interesting. You know how you can. There's an alchemy that is created when you put, a movie with a fixed camera and a movie with a soundtrack, or a movie with no soundtrack, or a movie where it's just live music, or a movie with natural actors or professional actors. The way you can mix all of these elements and always bring something new, it's something that really keeps me going. you know. So the first film I made was very particular in the sense that it was it was made at a moment in which in Colombia there was no support for cinema. The public support for cinema was extremely poor, and for a young filmmaker or aspiring filmmaker, it was a dream that seemed impossible to make a film. Or something that would happen like 30 or 20 years of working, and maybe 10 years working on a single film to get made. And the thing that has always drawn me to cinema is storytelling. And there are certain stories that are just bursting, they are coming out of you, and you have to tell them. And I've never tried to reason why so much. I try to. For me, it comes from a deep place, and I think if I rationalize it too much, the spark of that creation gets lost. I just like to go for it when the timing is right and when the circumstances I feel are right. And I saw that there was the possibility of making a film with video with just the money. I didn't have money, so I went to a TV show. One of these contest TV shows, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I answered some ridiculous questions, and I didn't get the big prize, which I was hoping to get it to make my film, but I got some $3,000. So I got them and I put them onto making the film, and I learned a lot in that experience. Definitely, the main lesson for me was that when people are not doing a project for money, but that because the story appeals to them and because they are passionate about what the film is saying, it's going to work. That's the most important thing for me. That people are really invested in and believe that what we are doing is worth telling. And so I got together with a group of really passionate people, good friends. And we went through all the hardships of making a no-budget film, which is something that I don't want to do again, and I don't recommend anyone doing, because it's very difficult to do a film like that. It's really a draining experience, and it leaves you. I was in a very bad shape after we finished that film. But I was also happy because I was able to tell something which was very important to me, and which was what was a personal account, a personal portrayal of what I was seeing in Colombia at the time. This was a moment in Colombia which was very difficult. It was the height of the internal conflict between the guerrillas and paramilitaries, and it was a moment of great violence. And I wanted to find a way, the artistic goal of that film was to find a way to express what this was doing to our soul in a way that was not violent, in a way that was not a spectacle, in a way that was intimate, in a way that was personal, and that spoke about the individual. I believe in the words that Truffaut said, that you cannot make an anti-war film, in the sense that war on cinema always looks spectacular. It's always a spectacle, and it always looks. It ends up looking cool, and that's terrible. So I wanted to get away from a very spectacular representation of that and talk about things that were really important for me at the moment and for Colombian society at the moment. It was a film that dealt with reconciliation, with coming together again after a conflict. And that was something that was, in the moment we made it, it was science fiction. But in the years that followed, there was a peace process that successfully ended this year. And there was a lot of talk. This subject that we dealt with within the film, it became a subject of the national discourse. So it was, and the film became important to a lot of people. And when the film came out, it really spoke to a lot of people. It really connected very well. So we were able to finish it thanks to a festival, to the support of the San Sebastian Film Festival at the time. And we were able to release it in Colombian cinemas. And for me, that was just something that I didn't think was possible. but the film was released and it was very interesting because a lot of young people went to see the film, and a lot of young people saw the film and thought, maybe it's possible to do Colombian films in a different way. And so a lot of them grabbed their cameras and started making films in a very similar way, or with friends, and several very interesting films came out of that. So I think for me that was the best thing about it. But it also had a very successful run in festivals and in awards and everything. So it really opened the doors to make films in a professional way.
Let's talk a little bit beyond, I think, because I assume that most of the people know your third film. And before going deep to that film particularly, which is, I think, till now is really your film. It's a film which there is a lot of ambition, but you are at the height of the ambition, according to myself. So, but beyond that, let's contextualize a little bit Colombian cinema. Because there is a new generation of filmmakers in Colombia. You are the one. You are the most, from all the new generation filmmakers, you are the one who has a most tendency to storytelling. Some others, they are more in the contemplative way of doing cinema, minimalism. You didn't take the minimalism path, which is something within Latin American films. There is a big tendency, not only in Colombia, you could see that in Bolivia, you could see that in Argentina, you could see that in Chile. But you, from the very beginning, you had a urge to tell stories, and you say that storytelling. I don't believe that cinema should be only storytelling, but of course, it's a path extremely well known and a path extremely justified by itself. However, let's talk a little bit about the context of Colombian cinema nowadays. You have people like Oscar Navia, you have people like Felipe Guerrero, you have people like yes. So, and you have the past. You have a kind of masters like Victor Gaviria on one hand, Luis Ospina on the other. Can you, in a way, tell how do you perceive yourself on a history of cinema from your country, and in what kind of tradition?
Yes, it's. I don't think I have the distance to put myself in the context of Colombian cinema, because I think that's something that I personally would invite the audience to do. For me, I think if I was thinking about that, I would not be thinking about what I was really coming out of. I think that's a challenge for a filmmaker. There's so much pressure around. There's so much voices around. There's so much opinion going around. And everyone is trying to tell you what to do. Everyone is trying to tell you which paths you should take, and you can get easily distracted by that. I learned that very early, and I decided that the way that to go was to make your own path, and make it in an honest way of what is coming out of you. I agree with you that I don't think cinema is just about storytelling. I think cinema has endless possibilities, but that's what comes out of me. That's what pours out of me. And even though I battled with it for a while, but no, I realize now that, and in the process of Embrace of the Serpent, I became really aware of how important storytelling is, and how our world is built on the stories we tell each other. But that's something that we deal with more ahead. Colombian cinema has a very fractured and accidented history. It's less than 100 films were made in Colombia until the decade of the 80s. And it was always the result of very personal efforts by people who were willing to sacrifice or give up their own wealth or their own property or their family's wealth or whatever, and into making films. And almost all of 99% of the efforts would be complete failures. And there were a lot of, it was a cinema that was plagued by technical difficulties, and the fact that in Colombia, like in most of Latin America, it's very difficult for the audience to access Colombian cinema, because more than 90% of the screens are occupied with Hollywood product. So in that context, it's been very difficult for Colombian cinema to emerge. But finally, in the 80s, there was the first initiative of a support for Colombian cinema, which allowed a generation of filmmakers to make their first films. The ones Roger mentioned are the most important, Luis Ospina and Victor Gaviria, also Carlos Mayolo, and there were others, and they made the first fully achieved, realized Colombian films. But that effort was ended by the government in the 1990. They decided to kill, and they killed Colombian cinema the support for Colombian cinema for about 10 years. And so many filmmakers from that generation would only be able to make 2 or 3 films in their career. For example, a filmmaker like Victor Gaviria has only been able to make 4 films in 30 years. But several important films were made, several key films were made, and each one of them gave us something different. I was very inspired by the work of Victor Gaviria and his work with natural actors, with non-professional actors, and in his quest to reveal something profound about Colombian identity and Colombian society, but also by Luis Ospina, by Carlos Mayolo. But I think Colombian cinema is a young cinema, and it's a cinema that is looking for its own identity. And I think I find that to be a privilege, because I realize that when you are a young filmmaker starting out, and you have a huge tradition behind you, it sort of weighs. It's like you're carrying a lot of weight. And I feel that a lot, for example, with Italian filmmakers, or German filmmakers, or French filmmakers that have all this huge tradition and all these great masters. And there's this idea that cinema already, all the masterpieces have been made. It's like, and all the great films, and everything that was supposed to have been made is already made, is behind you. And I have never felt that in Colombia. I felt that the best things we can make are in the future. We still have our great films to be made in the future. And that has been encouraging to me. And I think looking for stories in Colombia, in your own place, in the place where you are from, you can find stories that will be able to communicate with anyone on any place on earth. I believe that in that sense, in the power of cinema. So, and the fact that there hasn't been that many Colombian films means that there are a lot of stories that have not yet been told. And is just a space for possibility and a playful space for the future, I think, and that's why I'm happy to continue to make, and I hope to be able to continue making films in Colombia.
When one thinks about Colombian cinema, there are certain films which make history, and I think really that in contemporary context, the embrace of the serpent embrace is a point of departure from Colombian cinema. So let's talk about that film particularly, which is the most known abroad, and I guess here also. And this kind of Herzogian film, I would say. There is. I remember when I saw it for the first time, I say, "Aha, Ciro is becoming Herzog," and I think in a very good way, not in like you were imitating. You were imitating his gesture of grandeur, like to look for to have an ambition. That is something that some filmmakers sometimes they want to become humble. Humble is for religious people, not for filmmakers. So, and you have that ambition, and the film, it's really something. So I would like to understand, how do you conceive the film? From where does it came? We know that there are ethnologies on one hand and biologists on the other hand, but how do you get to that story, and how you start to develop a story from the original, real people who were there in Colombia at certain time?
Yes, basically the starting point is the fact that I had done the two previous films that I had done dealt with very personal and stories that had a direct connection to my life or the story or people that I had known, and it was extremely personal. And the second film that I made was in the context of the culture that I grew up, and they were it was talking about very very personal, close things to me. And after doing the second film, I said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to get away from that because you spend so much time making a film, 5 years of your life and so much effort, and you spend all that when you finish it, you just want to do something completely different. You want to go in the complete opposite direction because otherwise I would go crazy. And I wanted to take the opposite path, in the sense that to go into the unknown, something that I didn't know about, that had no connection to me. And Amazonia, which is a very big part of Colombia, it's half of the country, is a region that is very unknown to Colombians. In that sense, I would add to your idea that maybe some films are made for foreigners. The thing in Colombia, we are foreigners in our own country. So my films are made for Colombia, in the sense that these are films that are talking about deep issues about Colombia, but they are revealing those issues to Colombians, because in Colombia we have one of these, we don't have a strong connection to our own history and to our own cultures, which is something that I find that in Armenia people, for example, have a very strong connection to their history, and they know about it. Now in Colombia, our history has been taken from us, has been erased, and our culture is constantly under threat of being erased. So Colombians are really have a huge identity crisis, and we don't know who we are. We don't know our native languages. We don't know our history. We don't know the people's struggle, and we have very completely distorted ideas about what progress is and what civilization and modernism is. So I'm making films in very. I'm naturally attracted to films which take place outside of the narratives that we are told. I don't know, in a lot of Eastern Europe, Colombian telenovelas are very popular. I don't know if that's the case here in Armenia, where people have seen stuff like Ugly Betty or Café, but they are super popular in countries like Bulgaria it's funny. But that has been the main narrative that Colombians have of themselves for many years. And it's a completely distorted narrative. And when I'm always interested in going to in making films in places in which you can tell a new story. You can tell a story with people you have never seen, in languages that you have never seen. And it just, the opportunity to look at history from the flip side, that attracts me. That I think it's something that cinema can do. And an Amazonian history is something that Colombians had no idea about, and I don't even know about so much. I didn't even know when I started, so it was out of curiosity. I thought that when you say about films about Amazonian jungle or stories about Amazonian jungle, you think of the Herzog films, you think of films or stories that have been made by foreigners, and that we have never been able to tell it from our perspective, so from a local native perspective. So that was appealing to me, and I started reading about and researching about Amazonian history. In that process, I came upon the stories of the explorers, and I thought it was a fascinating story, and I couldn't believe it had never been told, and I was struck by how big those encounters between men of science from different worlds, because Amazonian shamans are men of science as much as scientists. Those two people from completely different worlds coming together and having a human dialogue, and how that human dialogue really changed the world, because really a lot of our perspective on the world comes from those encounters. When those encounters happened 100 years ago, it was ridiculous to think about preserving the environment, for example. It was ridiculous to think about preserving languages, native languages, because the indigenous people were seen as subhuman creatures that needed to be indoctrinated or evangelized or eliminated. And there's so many things that have changed during the 20th century, and those encounters really made an impact, because the books that were written about that experience influenced generations of people, from the first ecological movements to all the Beat Generation writers to most of what we know as counterculture in the 50s and 60s. So yeah, it had a huge effect, and I thought that was a fascinating story that drew me in. And that was the beginning.
There is one, you said something that I want to emphasize, because I think it's one of the most intriguing on one hand, and at the same time a very important point from your point, the perspective that you take in your film, which is you don't demonize the Western scientific worldview, I mean the scientific worldview, but at the same time you neither over-romanticize about the shamanism in Colombia. As you said, and I think is one of the most important points in your film, the two systems of knowledge are meeting, not only a culture, but I think that is really an accomplishment of your film. In that, I was absolutely surprised that you made a quiet effort to understand the language. Not in that film is spoken in Latin, in French, in German, in English, and 2 or 3 Amazonian languages. So can you explain why you were so worried about the language itself as a phenomenon and to incorporate it in the film? And on the other hand, how was the process to learn? Because those languages are almost erased languages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as I started going, I did a first year of research, which I just read and did a lot of academic work, And after that was finished, I started going to Amazonia, and I went to many different places. Colombia and Amazonia is the size of France, so it's a huge place. So I went to many different places for research, for meeting people, and also to see if this crazy film that I had in mind was possible to be made somewhere. And I realized that, the first thing you need to know is that in Colombia, 67 different languages are spoken. It's not, but there are some of these languages that are spoken by only a handful of people, and they're about to disappear. And when a language disappears, it's like that's something that I read in one of the books. It's the ultimate tragedy, because every language is an entire way of understanding the world. And when a language fades away, for example, you don't say, there's no word for friend in the Bara language, the Barazana language. When you say friend, you say my other heart. In Tucano language, the same word that is used for the female sexual organ is the word that is used for sunrise. What does that mean? Yeah, it's a complete world that disappears when a language disappears. And the ability and the possibility, it was clear to me from the beginning that Amazonia was a huge, big Tower of Babel, because not only many languages are spoken within the different communities, but also people from all over the world have come to the Amazonia looking for its resources or its knowledge or or exploring it. And so you have the story of Amazonia for Colombians has been told by Germans, by Norwegian, by Swiss, by French explorers, and they all left a trace of their language. So there's always people from all over the world talking their languages and the indigenous language. So in order for the film to be a true film, it had to be honest with that. It had to represent that. But the explorers who were the main inspiration for the film, they understood this, and they took a big effort to learn the language of the other, and I found that gesture very moving, because it's usually in what has happened in Latin America is that the language of the other is forced upon people. So, for example, Spanish or Portuguese were forced upon native people, and but the explorers that came, they really took the effort of learning the language of the other and trying to speak in the language of the other and understanding the world through that language. So it was a very moving gesture, and I thought the film will also give us the possibility to preserve a few of these languages, because there are languages that are spoken in the film which are only spoken by a few very old people and that are about to disappear. So we managed to get a few sentences of those languages for posterity, hopefully, you know.
Something that is surprising about the embrace of the serpent embrace, it's you would have been tempted to shoot nature in certain ways that people would be, oh, look at Amazonia, how grander and beautiful and so on. But you restrict yourself in a way, like, and I like to talk about, you know, cinema cannot go without stereotypes. Stereotypes are not only stereotypes towards people, but towards the way that we see and shoot cities and nature. You avoid that in the film. That I think is again one of the main accomplishments from your point of view. So I would like to know, how do you how did you think at that moment to shoot nature? Because it's not you capture the beauty of it, but you are not overdoing on beauty of the nature, which is a big problem for filmmakers. Which in a way is a kind of re-watching your previous film where nature was extremely beautiful in a way. You understand what I mean? Yeah. So can you take something, because it's quite particularly precise the way that you capture nature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's always just it has to come from a place. It's not about, for me, it's not just a formal thing, but also what are you trying to convey? In the previous film, Los Viajes del Viento, The Wind Journeys, nature. It's a film about people who have a very close relationship to nature and who express it through music. How music is an expression of the relationship between man and nature. And for them, nature is a source of inspiration and a source of and a source of beauty and a source of motivation for existing in the world. You know, their relation, and the film needed to portray that. So that's the way they see it, the people in the film. In Embrace of the Serpent, also there was it was coming from somewhere, and it's a bit more complex. Nature this is going to sound very strange, but there are no female characters in the film. And that was something that we came up during the process of screenwriting. In the story, there's no way that we can really make a female character, write a female character into the film. So I started going into Amazonian myth, and I understood that the nature, that jungle, is the female character of the film. So with this, and that's something that is very strange for Western narrative, but it makes complete sense in Amazonian myth. So I decided that the film would have to be an Amazonian myth also. I started out with a script that was very linear, very clear, very scientific and anthropological in a way, in which everything was very, very well explained and everything became very clear. And throughout this process, I realized that the film, if we did that film, it would be a mistake. The film needed to also take as much from Amazonian myth and Amazonian storytelling. But for us, as Amazonian storytelling is incredibly difficult to understand. It's the most complicated narrative that I have ever encountered, and the most mysterious narrative. But the film needed to draw from that. So we decided that it was going to be, the jungle should be seen in the way that they see it in Amazonian myth, which is sort of like a character in itself. So, and it's not a character that is defined by its beauty or the other side, which is what you usually see in jungle films, in the Herzog films, for example, as a place of madness and a place of hell, because that's not what it means to them. So in order to stay true to that, to their view, we decided that it was going to be a jungle that was going to be a character in itself, and that it was going to be a mysterious character, that it was going to only be partially revealed, and that it wasn't going to be expressed in an obvious way. So that was sort of the way that we started understanding that how to, and every time that you see the jungle in the film, it is sort of serving the purpose of a character.
Something again about the film is like there is one of the beauty of how you portrayed the narrative is a narrative of learning. You, as a viewer, you start learning through the characters. That is one hand of the film. But in a certain moment, there is a kind of intrusion in terms of even of the narrative, which is there are two narrative sections, which is the eruption of the Christianity or the Christian church, the Catholic Church in the continent, which changed a little bit the intimacy of the way of the narrative is being told till that moment. So, first of all, I was wondering if that intermission was something that you wrote from the very beginning. It was something that you add later on, and how do you see that? Because it's in certain moments it seems to be two films at the same time, which is of course is absolutely justified in terms of the history of Amazonia and the history of Colombia. But even I would say that there's certain kind of quality in the film that change when the Christians, the priest and his followers appears in the film. How was that? The process of included, or was the very beginning? How do you perceive that now that the film has been? It's all in the past.
Yeah, it was from the beginning because it was one of the most fascinating parts of the story for me. What you see in the film, it really, I don't have that much imagination to create something like that. That really happened. And it was much, much crazier than in the film. But, and there's something that is the one formal concern that I have. I think of film, I like to think the structure of films as an overall picture. But I think I don't like films in which, I think I don't like when a film is the same all throughout the film. I think at a certain moment, a film should question itself and a film should transform itself. I don't know. I honestly, I'm trying to figure out where that comes from. But it's just a way. It was just a way of narrative that I like, that I believe in which a film is not like this, but just before going back, it takes you somewhere else, and it shows you, it takes on a different form. That's something that I started learning about in music. That's something that, for example, Igor Stravinsky was great at doing in music, and it's just an artistic form in which the film sort of reevaluates and then continue in order to find its final form, so that it's not just one thing, but it becomes a living thing. I find it kind of boring when a filmmaker just takes a path and there's nothing, because that works for a long. You can do a whole film just sticking to a certain rules, but I always like to, at some point in a film, to question them and to take them somewhere else. And in this case, it was also that it was coherent for me, because that's what the eruption of Christianity in the Amazonia was like. It's something that's completely unnatural, that comes from somewhere else, and that it just leads to in history. It led to a level of craziness and insanity that the region had never seen. So I thought so, but yeah, of course, I questioned that a lot during the process of making it, even filming it, because I knew that it was a risk. It was a risk that I was taking, and but I think a film if you don't take risks in filmmaking, yeah, well, there's no point. You can't just see filmmaking is about taking risks. It's not about if you do things by formula or by what other people expect from you. I think that's the worst trap. But it's very easy to fall into it. And so yeah, at the end, we realized that it was going to be a dividing sequence, and it's been a dividing sequence. There are some people who think that the film is great until that part, and there are some people who think that's their favorite part. That's the best moment in the film. Perception is always different in terms of filmmaking. It's crazy how different it can be. But we thought that, yeah, it was a risk that we took, but it was definitely important for the film to reevaluate itself at one point and to include this part of the story, because without it, the story is not completely told.
At the beginning of this meeting between you and I, and the people, of course, I said something about perception. In your first film, at a certain moment, the main character needs to take a medicine plant, and so the film plays with the images and sound. The perception of the character is the perception of the viewer. In this film, at the very end, finally we could have a grasp. We grasp what Chacruna, which is the name of the plant, can give us as a perspective. It's a kind of a visual journey, and even not only visual, also a sound journey, because you put a lot of attention to downsize the sound in order to emphasize the perception of what we are watching as a vision through Chacruna, which is a kind of powerful plant which change our center of perception. So that is one of the most challenging things that you have done in this film, and I think it's something it works perfectly well. Not only that, you have changed, the whole film is in white and black, but at that particular moment, it changed the color, and the vision that we have is extremely strange. And it's not the typical kind of vision that many people who have been doing films about Indian cultures, like I can imagine now, for instance, which is a film that I really, really like, which is Jim Jarmusch, Death Man. And there is a certain moment in that film, there is again a vision of through a plant. But I would like to know, how do you get to that point, to do the Chacruna visual journey in the film? Why you have taken the risk to put color, and tell me that, because that is really astonishing in a way.
Yes, that was also another moment in which the film sort of breaks and so I did this in this film. I did that twice. But that was also a risk that we were taking. We weren't sure how it was going to turn out, and how our audiences were going to receive it. But the thing about it's just the goal, the idea was to make a cinematographic representation of the spiritual journey. And the way that the spiritual journey is described by the indigenous people is that it's a moment in which the world breaks. The world breaks, there's a crack in the world, and the world opens up, and you have a new perception. So in order to represent that, the film needed to break itself, open itself, and give you a new perception. It was very clear for me at the beginning that we did not want to turn this into a special effects show, which is something that you could do, and I've seen it in a lot of movies. You can go, and you can bring all the digital artists and do a really psychedelic thing, but that was not the point. It was supposed to be the opposite of that. It needed to be very primitive. It needed to be something like a child could draw, because that's what the images that you see during that sequence is through Barasana imagery of the Barasana natives. And that's the way they represent it. And you see it, and it's very simple, and it's very elemental, and it's like child drawings. But that's what happens when you do that spiritual journey, that you go back to learning what you used to understand when you were in the womb. You're talking about sound, and the sound designer, Carlos Garcia, had a brilliant idea, which was that he used the sound. He was he had a child recently, and he used the sound of the baby's heart in the womb during that sequence. So and it really has a very strong feeling, and it's about going back to the womb. It's going back to an elementary place, even before life exists. So that's the way in which it's described, and that's what we wanted to do in the sequence.
Before opening this meeting to the audience to raise some questions, I'd like to do one more question, which is connected with there are two films you are working on. One, it's, I think, a smaller one, and the other is the bigger one. One is a co-directed film, and the other is the one that you are waiting for, The Barbarians, which is a novel by Coetzee that you are about to shoot it, which is very challenging. Good novel, good writer. I read that you are extremely interested in that novel for many years. So can you talk about, first of all, how do you get the permission to do this film? Have you been in contact with Coetzee or not? Mm-hmm. And what is coming on?
Yes, I'm working. We just 2 months ago we finished shooting a new film. It's coming out next year, and it's a co-direction with Cristina Gallego, who is also my partner in life, and this is just a natural evolution because Cristina has been a producer on my previous films, but she has our collaboration has been always a creative collaboration. So she has been a very important part of all the previous films, but in this particular film, she has a bigger creative contribution. So it's just a natural step, and it's a story that is very close to her, and it's a story as opposed to the previous ones, it's a story with a very important female presence, and so it's a different film. I'm also working with indigenous people this time the indigenous people of Northern Guajira, and I'm doing something that I've never seen. We're doing something that I've never seen, which is an indigenous genre film. An indigenous genre film. It's an indigenous gangster film, really. So it's something I've never done. I'm a big cinephile, and I love the classic genres of cinema. And one thing that has been very enlightening to me is how you can take these genres and bring it to these particular realities, and you can renew them. You can make them something else. So it's a noir in a way it's a noir, but it's also something completely new because we're doing it with the indigenous people. Huh? Yes, and that film is going to be finished next year. So that's the next film. In English, it's called Birds of Passage, Pájaros de Verano in Spanish. And after we finish that, I'm going to start working, hopefully, on Waiting for the Barbarians. No, it's not a project that I've been. It wasn't something that I read a long time ago. No, the story was Coetzee and my producer Michael Fitzgerald have had this project of making a film of Waiting for the Barbarians for a long time, and when Coetzee saw Embrace of the Serpent, he said, maybe I think he should be the right director for this film. So I got a call from Michael Fitzgerald, and he said, we think you're the right guy to do this. So I went in and read the novel, and I agree. It was just I knew how to do this. This is perfect for me. It's dealing with a lot of the subjects that I'm interested in. It's a great novel, and it has a wonderful setting. And I've always wanted to do a film. For this film, I'm taking a lot of inspiration from the films of David Lean. It's a film that is close to this spirit of David Lean. So, and that's something I always wanted to do. I never thought I had the opportunity to do it. And I have to be careful with what I say about it. But it's great because it's not a Hollywood studio film. Producer Michael Fitzgerald has made great films, but independent films. He works with, for example, the films of Tommy Lee Jones, The Homesman, The Three Barrels of Melquiades Estrada, or the films of Sean Penn. He's done films that are open for the American market, but also very peculiar in their interest and I think, and basically we met with the producer and we talked and we realized that we have the same film in mind. I see the film that he sees, and when that happens, and the process of working on it has been very easy. John Coetzee himself adapted the script, and he did a great adaptation of his own novel. I was very worried because the novel is really literary, but he took all of the literary stuff out, and he really recreated a great structure for the film. And I just read the script and I said, this is a film that I can perfectly see and I can perfectly imagine. So we're hoping that it works because it's being produced independently, and it's not happening within the major studio system, but independently. But it's a project that if we get it right, I think it's going to be a very special film, and it's going to be very coherent with the film that I've done so far. But it's also going to be something new and different.
It is your pick Mark Rylance, or it was the producer pick?
No, it's usually Mark Rylance was already on board when I came in, but I just read the book and I said, he's perfect. It's a role that there are only two actors in the history of film who have played that role, and it's Alec Guinness or Mark Rylance. No more. And I read and he's perfect for him. And we're finishing to cast, and we're still deciding on the exact place where all of the shooting is going to take place. But it's a different way of working, definitely. But so far it's been I haven't felt like it's a big departure for me in a creative sense. In a production sense, it's definitely a big departure. But I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't believe in it.
Rylance he's not so known till the moment that he did the film with Spielberg, the Bridge of Spies, where he has made a fantastic film called Angels and Instincts, which is outstanding, and I can imagine you that it's perfect for that novel. I don't know. Let's see.
He's just perfect for the novel. I don't know how famous he's going to get now that he's the star of Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, But he's a guy whose main interest is really in theater, and he doesn't mind. He says, I'm going to do theater for 6 months, and he's recognized as the greatest theater actor in the UK, which is a lot. And he's really admired by many actors because of his commitment to the craft, And he was very memorable with Steven Spielberg in Bridge of Spies. And Steven Spielberg has been working only with he's in 4 Steven Spielberg movies now, and the next 2 also. So he's a great actor, and I'm really looking forward to working with him.
Okay, maybe Malik, it's the moment to.
Եթե հարցեր ունեք, խնդրեմ. I just need one of the microphones. Volunteer ka?
Okay.
You have.
Thank you very much. Too loud. I have a question. You are a young director. What can you advise to young directors, please?
Yes, for people who are starting out, I was talking to young people are very interested in knowing where they can study filmmaking, and I think Filmmaking is not something that that someone can teach you. I think the only ones who can teach you about filmmaking are the masters of cinema in the past. So you really, if you want to learn filmmaking, it's not worth paying a lot of money to go to a private school to learn filmmaking, because they can learn you technique. You can learn a lot of technique, but that's easy to learn, it's not that difficult. But the language of cinema, you can only learn it by watching the classics and the masters and all the cinema that you can see. So I would recommend that you go to the cinema more, and then once you have done that you forget about that, and you start making and you start looking at life with that perspective, but looking at life, because I also see a lot in young filmmakers that they have watched a lot of movies and they make movies to look like other movies that they have seen. So it becomes a bit of a circle in which cinema is about cinema. And I think cinema should not be about cinema. Cinema should be about life.
Խնդրեմ, ուրիշ կա հարց։
Բարև ձեզ, Սաթիկ Ստեփանյան, Հայաստանի ազգային կինոկենտրոնից։ Դուք ձեր խոսքի մեջ ասացիք, որ կոլումբիական կառավարությունը խեղդեց կոլումբիական կինեմատոգրաֆը։ Ինձ հետաքրքրում է, որն էին պատճառները եւ այժմ ինչպիսին է վերաբերմունքը կոլումբիական կինոարտադրությանը։
Yes, I mentioned that, but I forgot to mention the second part of the story, which is that after they killed the support agency in the 1990, in 2003, a law was passed for the support of cinema, and that works much better than the company that used to be doing it before, because there was a cinema institute that was very problematic, and it was plagued with corruption, and it made a big mistake that it was producer of the Colombian films, and I think that's something that should not be done. The government shouldn't co-produce films. In the law that was passed in 2003, it created a fund from the box office of foreign films to support the making of Colombian films. And it's done in a way that is very transparent, and that has had very good results because filmmakers are able to work with freedom. So it's the Colombian example is a way of learning from past mistakes, and a law that is working much better, and that has it's right now the main problem is not with making Colombian films, because now a lot of Colombian films are being made. Before it used to be, before the law, there was to be about 3 Colombian films per year, and now there's about 40. So it's been a lot of production. Now the problem is to get the film, to distribute the films. But I think that's a problem in most of the world.
Խնդրեմ։
Thank you.
Այնտեղ հարց կա։
Thank you very much for coming here. My name is Anush, and I'm a songwriter. Yeah, and I was very interested to know about the songs and the music that you are preparing, you are making during the movie. And as I love very much nature, and I would like to cooperate with you, and I don't know, I'm so very embarrassed right now, that's why I can't talk. Anyway, there was also a question about the language, and I saw that in Australia, as I'm also a linguist and a translator, I saw there is a Google Yimiter, it is also a language, and it depends on a certain family, like living there. I can say that there are more than 2,000 people, and it is very similar to the questions and the things that you have told about this. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I think I'm going to watch it later. And there was also something that I will say right now, I forgot. But later I will ask you another question. No, yes, I remember. I know that you are working with Robert Pattinson, and I'm so proud of that. I'm so happy because he's one of my favorite artists, actually. And I would like to also cooperate if it is possible.
Խնդրում եմ հարց։ Ձեր հարցը, որովհետև հարցերի համար ենք գնայք, որ
Yeah, maybe there are a lot of questions, but I want to cooperate with him. This is my question, and I like you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I met Robert. He's a big fan of Embrace of the Serpent. He really likes the film, and he's a really big fan of cinema in general. He's not he likes movies by great directors, and he's a great cinephile. And so he came about, and he asked to meet me, and we had a great conversation, and hopefully we will be working together in the future. He's interested in working with filmmakers like me, which are a bit outside of the Hollywood system. He's also made very interesting movies with great directors around the world. So yeah, he's on the way to becoming a great artist, definitely. And he's constantly surprising us as an actor. So yeah, it's gonna be great to work with him. And as far as your other question, yes, I have noticed that we made this film, and we thought that the story was very particular, very focused on something, on a very particular place. But once the film has been around the world, we realized that in so many places there are people that can relate to it, you know, to this story of languages being disappearing, and the struggles with that of colonialism around the world. So yeah, we've taken the film to places like, for example, when we showed it in Turkey, there were people that were coming up to me and talking about how the film really reminded them of the experience with the Kurdish people. And the same thing happened in South Korea. You know, people could relate to it in ways that, and that's something that I think is wonderful and beautiful about filmmaking. You know, because it really creates connections between peoples that you wouldn't imagine.
The film was shot in film, or it was a digital?
No, it was shot on 35 millimeter.
Yeah.
I believe
Because the picture was incredible.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity to shoot in 35, I like to take it, because it's for a certain. I mean, I don't think digital video can replace 35. I think it's a different thing. It's not better or worse. It's just when you capture the image on celluloid, the image is there. It has been really captured, and you can see it. It's visible. It's an organic capture of image. When you do it through digital, it has a processing which it turns into zeros and ones and the binary language, and then and you need a machine to grab it and a machine to reprocess it and to decode it into an image. So it's a completely different nature of image. So for me, it gives a different feeling. It has a completely different perception, which is good, and I like the way some filmmakers use it, and I think it's a different language. I don't like when video is used as if it was film. I think it's different, and it should be used differently. It's like oil and watercolor. And for these films, the past films that I've made, they have this. They need this organic representation of nature. That's what's right for that film. But if I make a film in which the best way to represent is the digital way, I don't have no problem in doing it.
It even was looking for me like it was shot in 70 millimeters, not 35. It was really very.
Yeah, I wish I could do a film in 70 millimeters, but that's difficult. Only Christopher Nolan can do that now.
Okay, խնդրեմ, այնտեղ հարց կա, հետո դուք։ Ուղղակի ուզում եմ, որ մի քանի հոգի հարց տան, որ երկրորդ հարցին չլինի։
Արփինե Հակոբյան, ներեցեք կուզենամ հայերեն ներկայացնել հարցս, որովհետև անգլերեն Չգիտեմ, ինչպես է իրավիճակը Կոլումբիայում, արդյոք մարդիկ նայում են, մասսաները նայում են ֆիլմ առհասարակ։ Այսօր մեր իրականությունը այն է, որ նոր տեխնոլոգիաներ, շատ ինֆորմացիա եւ շատ հաճախ մարդիկ ալարում են կամ այդքան ժամանակ չեն ծախսում, որպեսզի 2-3 ժամ նստեն ու ֆիլմ նայեն։ Իհարկե նայողներ կան, ու երբ որ նայում ենք իսկական պրոֆեսիոնալ աշխարհում շարժումը դեռ գնում է, բայց եկող սերունդը ավելի նոր տեխնոլոգիաներ, ձեր ասած այդ իլյուզիաների, տեխնիկաներ օգտագործելով, ինչպես պահպանել, ինչ գործիքներ կարելի է կիրառել, որ իսկական մաքուր դասական կինոն դեռ շարունակի ապրել, ինքը շարունակելու է բնականաբար, բայց երիտասարդ նոր սերնդին ինչպես ծանոթացնել, բերել դրան։ Շնորհակալություն։
Yes, I think there's something that it's clearly happening is that cinema is no longer the most prominent art form in the world, which was the case throughout the 20th century. And you know, every different time of mankind has had a different time of, and it was at one point the most prominent was opera, and at one point the most prominent was theater, the most prominent was literature, and I think cinema was the most prominent during the 20th century, but now it's slowly giving, and I think it looks like the next art form that is going to have this big, huge impact will be video games or virtual reality. That's a new age that is starting. But I think cinema will continue as long as we protect the experience of being able to watch films in the cinema. Because it's not the same watching the films in the cinema as watching them on computers or on cell phones. You really lose a lot when you watch a film that was meant for the cinema in that way, and the experience of going to watch a movie and the experience that a festival can provide or that a special screen can provide or the 35mm projection, those are all experiences that are particular to cinema and that should be able to continue. And cinema has definitely has a huge influence on whatever's coming next. You know, the best video games, they try to portray an experience that is similar to cinema, and virtual reality is sort of developing from cinema in many ways. So cinema is a language that has a lot of future in those areas. But yeah, I think cinema has survived. It has survived many changes. It has survived the arrival of television. It has survived the arrival of sound, the arrival of there's been so many changes, and cinema is still here. So I don't think it can be. I don't think it's at risk. The important thing is that I think it's important to fortify the ways in which people access films, get to know films, and discuss films. So it's very important because that's the thing that I feel that has been most affected by the new technology is not cinema itself, but the appreciation of cinema. It used to be that people were able to appreciate cinema through criticism, to books, through film clubs, through debates, and I think that academic part of cinema and that part of that really helped people to love cinema is the one that has been most affected. And I think that's the effect of that we are seeing in people not being able to fully appreciate cinema. So I believe in making the academia, the critics, the analysis of film stronger and more accessible. That's what keeps the film culture alive. Because for production, production is, more films are being made now than ever. You can watch the films of this year throughout all your life, and you will never finish because there are thousands of films, of new films. But the appreciation and the falling in love with cinema, that's something that needs to be improved and supported. Thank you.
Last time I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Nina, and I'm an editor. And my question is, do you work with the same editor in all your films, or you have different editors? And the second question is, do you trust to your editor? You can leave your film with him or her and go out and then come back. Thank you.
No, I haven't worked. I work in every film. I've worked with different editors. It's usually because of circumstances of co-production. When you co-produce with other countries, you need to have people working from those countries, and usually the editor. And right now we're working with Miguel in this last film that we're editing now. The editor is from Mexico. It's Argentinian who lives in Mexico. Miguel Esberfinger, who works also with. He has done Lucrezia. He's also the editor of all of Lucrezia Martel's films. He's really good, and I like to have the experience of working with someone new every time, even though the editors that I've worked with in the past, I've had a very good experience with them. And yes, I think it's important that you trust the people you work with. If you don't trust them, then why work with them? So I don't tell the cinematographer how to do his job, or I don't tell the editor how to do his job, or no, I just, we just discuss the film that needs to be made. But I also like that they are able to find their own way, and through their own creativity and what they put up, they make the film better. If they understand it, directing is not about telling people what to do. It's about inspiring them and leading them into the film into the best film possible, you know. But you cannot do that if you're telling people what to do. You know, you should be trusting their instinct and their talent and their creativity to improve, to make the film better every time. And editing is a tough process for me. I can say that in all of my films, I have always had to take out my favorite scene. So whenever you take out the scene that you like the most as a director, that's the moment in which, you know, the editing is going well.
You grow up to be able to do it. You have to grow up.
It's difficult. It's always difficult. You know, it's your favorite scene. You know, but you have to take it out. Yeah, it's always the case.
And the cinematographers always complain because they are shooting the most beautiful scene, and then it's not appearing in a film.
Yeah, I think if it works in the end, when people see the end result, they all understand. But everyone. But if they don't see that, if you tell them, you know, of course the actor will complain, the cinematographer will complain, everyone will complain, because there's a lot of work and a lot of money in every scene. But I believe in something that's art is more about what you take out than what you live in. It's more about taking out than putting in.
Խնդրեմ, կա ուրիշ հարց։ Խնդրեմ։
Հարցս կուզեի իմանալ դուք երբ որ ձեր ֆիլմը նկարում պատրաստում եք storyboard օգտագործում եք։
If I use storyboard? Yes, yes, that's part of the preparation. It's basically because this kind of films that we make, in the circumstances that we make them, we're always short on time and money. And when you are lacking these things, then you need to be as prepared as you can. What I like about the process of storyboarding is that it's a moment in which I am sitting alone with the film. So it's like writing like a musician who writes a score. So it's you and it's the one moment in filmmaking which is the director and the creation, you know, and you can create what's going to be on an audiovisual level, and you can think because the shooting of the film it's like Stanley Kubrick said, I think it's like trying to write a novel in a roller coaster. It's too crazy, the process of shooting, and you don't really have the time to think. So you should think about all this, the language that you're going to use and the shots that you're going to use. That's something I prefer to think before. but it's not open. It's open to change in the process. But yeah, it's an important part of the preparation, and one of the moments that I enjoy the most also, because it's a moment of creation, like writing a book or writing a poem or creating a song. You know, it's a very personal process, and then it becomes a massive process. But before that, there should be a moment, a personal moment of you and the language of cinema.
Խնդրեմ։ Հարցեր չկան? So, there is no questions. It's
I don't want to do. I don't want to make another question.
No,
but
go ahead.
No. I don't know if we are closing or not, but let me thank the translator.
Yeah, we will do it.
Okay.
I will not forget the translator.
Genius of the genius.
Best translator in Armenia. So he is here. Now I'm really very happy to have both of you here, because we specially invited Roger only for you. So it's a privilege of having him here because of you. And I'm happy that you are here, because 2 years ago when we saw your film, I was really amazed. We talk about that later in Hamburg when I met. But it's from the beginning. You hypnotize with the film and you go till end. It's really something that catch you immediately by visual, and then you go deep to the story. I didn't talk much because Roger is here. I shouldn't say anything more than that, but I'm really happy. And as soon I saw your name in a list of the jury and invited person, I put, he is going to do master class. So I'm very happy that you was here and we did this meeting with all of us. And thank you for coming. Thank you, Khachik, for doing this great job, and AGBU providing this space for us. It's the second year they are doing this for the master classes. And I hope your next film will get a place in the list of the Golden Apricot. So we will be able to see it here. And you will be there.
Thank you. Thank you very much all for coming. Thank you very much to the translator and to the festival for this wonderful invitation.
Thanks.